I remember it like it was yesterday, stepping off the bus as a greenhorn, fresh from the grueling trials of basic training. My spirit was unbroken, filled with a raw eagerness to serve the country I held dear. They sent me to a desolate base, smack in the midst of an unforgiving desert where the sun was a relentless foe and the silence hung heavy, broken only by the whispers of scorching winds. My assignment was to stand sentinel over a covert military facility, so shrouded in secrecy it was as if it were a mirage. Whispers flitted about among the ranks of cutting-edge technology hidden within its walls, but those were tales for another day. We were soldiers, sworn to obedience, our curiosity caged by the rigor of duty. In those initial weeks, the base barely whispered its secrets. The days were a blend of heat hazes and dust devils, my time consumed by patrols that skirted the base's edges. The job was nothing if not monotonous, yet I was acutely aware that a single lapse could spell catastrophe. I held steadfast in my resolve to excel, even if it meant my gaze was forever fixed on the horizon, vigilant for the faintest hint of peril. But then, in the darkness of one seemingly interminable night, everything I knew about the quiet of the desert was appended. Alongside me was a seasoned soldier, his face etched with the tales of battles past, his eyes a testament to the horrors he had seen. We were comrades in the stillness of our watchtower when an ungodly sound shattered the silence, a harrowing shriek that seemed torn from the throat of terror itself, almost as if a woman was screaming in mortal terror. Our eyes met, his wide with a dread that sent chills down my spine. There was no denying the presence of something sinister beyond the safety of our post. With hasty hands, we radioed for backup, all too aware of the agonizing weight that lay ahead. For now, we were an island in a sea of darkness. With rifles in hand, we descended, the blackness of night swallowing us whole, the only illumination a scattering of indifferent stars. The screams grew only louder, more desperate as we advanced. Time was a luxury we did not have, and as if conjured by our fears, a pack of wild dogs burst forth. Their eyes, like coals in the night, fixed on us with primal intent. We hesitated for nothing more than a breath before their charge compelled us to defend ourselves. The volley from our rifles was a thunderous roar, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The dogs were relentless, a frenzied mass of teeth and fury. Despite their numbers and ferocity, we fought with the valor of those with everything on the line. Yet, as one sank its teeth into my leg, pain searing through me, I saw my fellow soldier fall, the beasts converging on him like a dark wave. At that moment, when despair nearly took its hold, the distant rumble of salvation echoed through the chaos. Our backup, mounted in their steel beasts, had come. Whether it was the noise or some other unseen force, the dogs withdrew into the shroud of night, leaving us bloody but unbowed. The attack by the dogs, however, was but a prelude to the revelation that our sanctuary had been the target of a nefarious enemy plot, a stark awakening to the fragility of our presence in that forsaken desert. It was a lesson branded into our beings. The hubris of considering ourselves untouchable could be our undoing. Now, I impart this tale with a word of caution. It traverses paths that some might find unsettling. So, tread lightly as you follow the threads of my recollections. It begins with a bond formed not in the crucible of war, but in the innocence of childhood. Back in the days of primary school, I was the new kid, an outsider thrust into an ecosystem where friendships had been forged in the fires of previous school years. Among the sea of unfamiliar faces, there was Charlie, a beacon of warmth in an otherwise cold landscape. She approached me during an open house, her demeanor friendly, her smile a promise of camaraderie. Desperate for a friend in this alien world, I was quickly taken in by her charm. Our friendship blossomed quickly, as fierce and fast as any soldier's bond. We exchanged Skype details, and our conversations spilled from day into night, an endless stream of dreams and laughter. In those times, the battlefields and deserts were a world away, and the greatest wars we knew were fought with words and adolescent angst. Our calls became a fixture of daily life, an escape from the solitary hum of my surroundings. We talked for endless hours. Charlie had a knack for making me laugh, a balm for the soul in a world that was often too serious. Through her, I became part of a wider circle, including Catherine and Addison. We were just a bunch of kids, finding our way through the simple joys and fleeting troubles of youth. But as time marched on, like shifting sands, I noticed a change in Charlie. She seemed to carry a heavier burden, her laughter less frequent, her smiles tinged with a sadness that didn't belong on someone so young. It wasn't long before she shared the weight of her troubles. She was battling demons, ones that bore the names of depression and anxiety. As her friend, I stood by her, assuring her that this revelation changed nothing between us, and that seeking help was a step towards something brighter. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. Deep down, she didn't seem to buy into that sliver of hope. Our conversations took on a new depth. She vented, poured out her soul, and I listened. I became the pillar she leaned on when the winds of her storms howled too fiercely. In those moments, I felt a profound gratitude for being able to offer some comfort, as if I was repaying a debt to the girl who welcomed an outsider into her life. But the situation didn't improve. If anything, it worsened. Her emotional tempests grew more violent, her breakdowns more frequent. She began to view herself through a lens distorted by pain, convinced that she was worthless, that her own parents, whom I'd come to know as loving and concerned, despised her. When I tried to counter her distorted beliefs, she lashed out, calling me a liar, accusing me of feigned concern. It tore at me, hearing such words from a friend I held dear. At school, she'd mask her inner turmoil with a smile, a joke, a facade of normalcy. Any attempt to broach the previous night's episode was met with anger and dismissal. Confused and hurt, I respected her silence, hoping she'd open up in her own time. This pattern of breakdowns and accusations became our new twisted normal, a cycle I hoped each day would be broken. Then, Charlie introduced a harrowing new chapter: self-harm in plain view. The sight of her using a pencil to scratch her arm, sometimes out of frustration, sometimes without any discernible trigger, is seared into my memory. We, her friends, felt powerless, desperate to help but pushed away at every turn. Her cries for us to stop pretending we cared cutting deeper than any physical wound. The summer brought a brief respite, the warm nights a balm to her troubled psyche. Our talks during those fleeting months were like a breath of fresh air, a hint of the old Charlie surfacing. But as the new school year beckoned, so too did the return of her struggles. Middle school, with its new environment and challenges, seemed to pull her back into the abyss. It's difficult to recall those times without a shadow clouding my thoughts. The detail of that year is foggy, marred by worry and a constant state of alert over Charlie's well-being. Then, one night, a message from her chilled me to the bone. She spoke of a desire to end her pain permanently, detailing her plan with a calm that was more terrifying than her usual cries. That night, tears blurred my vision as I pleaded with her, professing my care, my fear of a world without her light in it. By some miracle, she relented, assuring me that she wouldn't go through with it. Relief washed over me, though it did little to ease the constant dread that shadowed me. The next day, I sought her out, only to be met with downplayed concerns and reassurances that I had overreacted. Still, I urged her to be forthcoming with her feelings, to share rather than shoulder the burden alone. She promised she would, and yet the severity of her episodes only climbed as the year progressed. Each breakdown, each moment of despair, I met with all the support I could muster. But I was a soldier in uncharted territory, fighting an unseen enemy with no clear strategy, every victory against her darkness followed by the fear of what battle we would face next. The creeping change was insidious, a slow poison that I barely noticed as it spread through our lives. By the time we reached the 7th grade, it felt like the storm we'd been bracing against had finally made landfall, its full fury unleashed. My memories of that year are clouded, mired in the chaos of what transpired. So I'll try to navigate through the haze and touch upon the critical moments. Charlie was floundering academically. Her resilience snapped. If she wasn't immediately good at something, she'd abandon it entirely, a white flag raised in silent defeat. Her self-destructive behavior intensified to alarming degrees. Attempts on my part to intervene were met with sharp rebukes or outright hostility. Yet through all this, she remained my best friend, the person I loved and who I believed loved me back. We could still talk about almost anything, save for the moments when I needed to express my own struggles. Then I was accused of monopolizing the conversation, or told bluntly that she couldn't handle it right then. It was as if my issues were a burden she could not bear. That year was pivotal for me in another respect. I began to question my gender identity. Amidst the confusion and the chaos, I found solace in a new friendship with Liz, who became my closest confidant and later my platonic partner. We were two trans kids, so deeply entrenched in our own closets that even acknowledging our true selves seemed impossible. Liz was the braver one, stepping into the light of her truth first. I embraced her, dreaming of the solidarity and support we could offer each other. But Charlie did not share my enthusiasm for Liz. Her jealousy was palpable. She feared Liz was stealing me away from her. I tried to reassure Charlie, to affirm her place in my life, but my words seemed to land on deaf ears. Midway through the year, Charlie confided that she might have feelings for me and queried whether I would consider a romantic relationship with her. At that point in my life, I was in deep denial about my own sexuality, so I responded ambiguously, which she interpreted as assent. She became more affectionate, hugging me, kissing my forehead, gestures that should have felt endearing, but instead left me feeling trapped and uncomfortable. Only later would I understand this aversion to touch, but at that time, I loathed myself for recoiling from my best friend's touch. It wasn't long before I confessed my discomfort, clarifying that I had no desire for a romantic relationship and that the physical contact was too much for me. Charlie seemed to take it in stride, even joking about her own need for touch, but then she withdrew, creating a gulf between us that extended beyond the physical space. Conversations dwindled, and she would swiftly find reasons to end our interactions. Our nightly calls continued, though they had become a grim lottery, never knowing whether I'd get a few sentences or be locked in a 4-hour vigil, trying to navigate her emotional tempests. There were nights she threatened grave harm, even claiming it would be my fault if she followed through. One harrowing evening stands out, a video message from Charlie, sitting beside her toilet, speaking so casually about ending her life that it sent chills down my spine. I bombarded her with texts, pleading, affirming my love, her parents' love, and how much she would be missed. I cried until my body was spent, waiting for a response that never came. I lay awake past midnight, the weight of dread suffocating me, until exhaustion claimed me and I fell into a tear-stained sleep, haunted by thoughts that she had gone through with her threat, that it was my failing that I hadn't reached her in time. The following morning, the relief that flooded me when I saw her walk into class was indescribable. It was like being granted a reprieve from an irreversible tragedy. I ran to her, hugging her, weeping, bombarding her with the pent-up fears and questions from the night before. Her casual apology for not checking her phone felt like a dismissal of the ordeal she'd put me through. That moment marked the beginning of a shift, a sign that the ties that bound us were fraying under the strain of her struggles and my inability to heal them. I could only stare in disbelief at her. This individual whom I had loved and cherished for so many years, whom I had nurtured and cared for, and who I thought I couldn't live without, now just chuckling it all away. My inability to respond was crippling. My entire perception of her was irrevocably altered in that instant. It felt as though a mirror had shattered, reflecting back a distorted reality I could no longer recognize. This was the moment the fissures became too wide to bridge, the beginning of our end. As the year dragged on, I began to slowly distance myself from Charlie. My affection for her persisted, profound and complex, but the daily emotional toll her breakdowns and tirades took on me had become unbearable. It was akin to being constantly berated by a storm with no shelter in sight. The guilt of withdrawing was immense. It felt analogous to abandoning someone with a fractured limb to ascend a mountain alone. Nevertheless, for my own sanity, I had to step back. In seeking validation and support, I turned to our mutual friends, sharing with them the convoluted web of our communications. As I unveiled the texts, a pang of guilt for exposing such private conversations gnawed at me, yet it was a necessary evil to convey the gravity of the situation. My friends were appalled. They couldn't fathom the words Charlie had hurled at me. In the end, my escape from Charlie was achieved, and I sensed that others drifted away from her as well. However, this victory was Pyrrhic. My other friends began to ostracize me, speaking ill behind my back, while I was left nursing the deep scars from a friendship that spanned 3 tumultuous years. They accused me of being consumed by my past with Charlie, and one by one, my friendships disintegrated. Attempting to reintegrate with my peer group proved futile. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. A constant anxiety that they were betraying my confidence like a whispered echo in my mind plagued me, and I was terrified of being equated with Charlie. So I withdrew from that circle too. And in hindsight, it was a necessary severance. Years have passed since then, and the distance has lent clarity to the trauma those years ingrained in me. This recount is but a skim across the surface of the harrowing experience that was my friendship with Charlie. A chapter in my life I am hesitant to revisit in full, lest old wounds are torn afresh. Liz remains my steadfast friend, her presence a beacon during the dark reign of what I can only describe as Charlie's terror. Her kindness was a stark contrast to everything I had endured, awakening me to the depth of the dysfunction. I harbor no hatred for Charlie, despite the anguish her actions inflicted upon me. We were just children, after all, navigating the tumultuous seas of growing up with neither map nor compass. People change, and I like to believe that the person I am now is worlds apart from the girl I was back then. Perhaps the same is true for Charlie. Everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story, but when it comes to Charlie, I hope our paths never cross again. In an effort to paint a fuller picture of the past, it's important to note that Charlie was on antidepressants from the summer after 5th grade. She often attributed her outbursts to issues with her medication, claiming she had forgotten her dose. Yet this too was a falsehood. Her parents were diligent in administering her medication nightly. In the 7th grade, during her episodes, she would ominously suggest that she, an alternate version of herself, would return shortly after a breakdown. She claimed amnesia of her actions during these spirals, yet in private, she would admit to remembering everything, using her alleged duality as a shield for her actions. She wielded guilt like a weapon, insinuating that any harm she inflicted upon herself would be my burden to bear should I step away from her. This manipulation anchored me to her side through fear and obligation. On those terrifying nights when she would fall silent, I was petrified that she had succumbed to her despair, and that I would be blamed for it. I imagined being confronted by her grieving parents, their sorrow turning to anger directed at me. But that day never came. I managed to break free from her toxic grasp, a liberation for which I am eternally grateful. Even in 8th grade, when she was still a fixture in the same school, our paths crossing in math class or the hallways, I made it my mission to avoid her at all costs. There were times I'd catch a glimpse of her on breaks, even standing close enough to touch, yet I could not bring myself to meet her gaze. It felt as though looking at her would be like staring into the sun. Painful, searing, destructive. It would be easy to succumb to hatred for all the suffering she caused me, but hate only perpetuates suffering. Instead, I choose to hope that she has found peace and a better path in life. As for myself, I hold on to the hope, for my own peace of mind, that our paths never intersect again. Thank you for allowing me this space to articulate a story that has long needed telling.